podcast of Noel McDermott's Wellbeing show, and I'm Noel McDermott, so I don't want to say that bit, but one day I might have a deputy presenter who will then have to call it Noel McDermott's Wellbeing show. I'll flog them into it. Anyway, I am Noel McDermott. It's lovely to have you back. You're listening to this on the equivalent of a Wednesday evening, UK 9 o'clock time. This is live, so you can join in. Give us a call on my mobile, +44 7506 319 745. I think that's it, but James will put the number out there. My brain has gone dead. That's it. I'm going to stop now. I've failed already. This show is over. I'm going to have sort of throw the toys out the pram. Anyway, the number and stuff like that will be sort of posted all the way through the show. It'd be lovely to hear from you. I've got back by popular demand the wonderful Matt Steinberg of Outside Edge Theatre. Matt, it is wonderful to have you back, and it's amazing that you survived these last 19 months and you still look relatively sane, so well done.
Thank you, Noel. Thank you.
Tell us about Outside Edge very briefly, and then we'll jump into getting to know a bit more about what it's been like the last couple of years.
Yeah, so I run a theatre company called Outside Edge Theatre Company, and we are the UK's only theatre company and participatory arts charity that's focused on addiction. So we use drama and creative activities to support people's recovery maintenance from substance misuse and also mental ill health. And then we create professional theatre productions about issues related to addiction. So we have these two parallel strands, but they also intersect when we make work with some of the service users, some of the people who have lived experience of addiction or mental ill health, but also when we work with professional artists that have lived experience of those issues as well. And so as much as possible, we try to integrate the lived experience of the people that we're working with, either professionally, artistically, or in a sort of participatory, artistic manner into the work that we're presenting.
I want to follow this strand a little bit and then come to how you've got through the last 19 months, because I think this thing about the mixing of professional theatre experience with peer experience or lived experience is really important. Tell me what your thinking is behind that. And I'll lay my table out. Was a theatre practitioner. I did it for many years. I mean, we first met through doing a piece of theatre. We brought you in as a director on a show. So that's how we first got to know each other. But my background was as an actor and a director, very much doing the sort of stuff that you're doing. Tell me why this mix of professional, why is this professional stuff important?
Well, it's where, I suppose it's the fuzzy edges of those two worlds in some respects. So it's when we create let's call it a mainstream production where the people that we're working with in a participatory arts capacity are not necessarily generating the material that ends up on stage or are in the pieces that we put on stage. What we are doing is taking stories that have been influenced by the work with that community, a recovery community, or people in active addiction. And again, most of the time, if not all of the time now, we're trying to work with artists with lived experience. So we'll take professional artists that have that lived experience, but that can shape it into something that we can then offer to a wider group of audience members than we might be able to do if we're creating a piece with community members for probably a smaller community, which would either be their friends and family or the recovery community. So in part, it's about creating work that has a slightly wider audience, but also the skill set, I suppose, that a trained actor, a trained director, a trained writer, or someone that has created a lot of pieces or a lot of work brings to the table into the development process while creating a piece of theatre is just radically different from what someone who is untrained brings to the table. It's not to say it's better or worse, but it's a different end result. So what those trained performers, what those trained writers, those trained actors might struggle to get is a real sense of immediate authenticity, which is something that the sort of untrained community participants who actually might have quite a bit of experience working either with Outside Edge or with other theatre companies, but they haven't gone to RADA, or they haven't dedicated their professional lives to creating work. It just means that they're going to have a different skill set and be a different kind of material with which to make the work or with which to make work from themselves. I know that sounds a bit vague, but
it's not. I mean, the way I'm hearing it is something like this: that when any of us experience something, it's difficult to get some sense of perspective on it, and we may need perspective on it, particularly if we've had difficult experiences in our lives, and actually be able to hand it over to somebody else to reflect it back to us in a way that they've interpreted it, can actually be, I think, quite healing and, dare I say, transformative.
Yeah, and I think, it's, the other thing is that we know that by making the best work possible, it attracts more people who might need to use our activities for recovery support or for social inclusion and connection. But also, if they're already in the, in our activities, it gives them something not to aspire to, because I think that's a really negative way of looking at it, but rather they can see something as having a different sort of quality, I suppose, that they might want to work hard towards.
I'm interested, sort of why you think aspire might be a negative connotation. I mean, is it because of the leveling stuff and there's different levels?
To me, it's that sense of, well, that's real and or that's good, and then what I'm doing or what we're doing isn't. And so I don't like that differentiation, because actually what's really fascinating is that, I mean, at the moment we're offering quite high quality and high level professional opportunities to our participants, to our community participants, or the people that we're, that are supporting their recovery through our activities. But the artists that we're bringing in to work with them, and this is, places like the Royal Court Theatre, which is the major writers' theatre in the country.
Right. People don't know that's really significant.
Yeah, but there's a huge give and take here. So you'd think that, and this is always one's concern, is that it's completely in one direction, but actually the people that they're working with at the Royal Court, or the professional actors and directors that have invited them into their rehearsal rooms recently on apprenticeships and to sort of feed in their lived experience to a professional rehearsal process, have found it equally rewarding and artistically stimulating, and have found the questions and the provocations to be valuable.
Avoiding this notion that it's a sort of patronizing or paternalistic experience. Here we come in and I mean, there's a classic Graham Norton show, asking, I'm trying to remember the name of the actress. She does this character of an old lady who's foul-mouthed and dreadful and stuff like that. And they were saying, well, where did you find this character from? And she said, oh, we had to do some good works while we were training at RADA, and we went to this old folks home. And we turned up thinking, this would be great. We'll do oldie worldy songs from the World War. And this lady was there and said, what the fuck are you doing? Yeah, like this. And that gave her this character. And I guess the lady was responding to that sort of sense of paternalism. We're coming in here to do something for you, and quite right too. But there's another sense of aspiration, I guess, which is that I can be different, and that maybe that's okay, to encourage people to feel that I can be different. Something can change.
Yeah, well, I think it's also, there is something about the sense, the perception that thing over there that I'm aspiring to is better than what I have to offer is actually completely false.
Yeah. Because
the thing that they're aspiring to doesn't think that it's necessarily that much better. And I think that the sort of the exercise at the moment is really fascinating, I suppose, because what we're seeing is that, is that preconception that people have that they are being invited into something that's really, special and unique. I mean, it is, but it's also, it isn't. It is a space or a place for them. Creating art is available to anyone. It should be available to anyone. But there are barriers put in our path to accessing it, and sometimes it's barriers because we don't feel that we're good enough or intelligent enough or creative enough to engage or be that kind of artist or engage with that kind of art. But then sometimes it's also socioeconomic. It's very, very complicated. And so what we're hoping to do through a lot of this work by again making these very blurry lines between the professional and the sort of community or participatory is we are challenging, I suppose, I hope, those power structures, both sort of systemically within the sector, but hopefully also within the community of people that we're working with, and the community of artists that we're engaging with.
Sure. But there's also, I mean, I think in terms of the professional, non-professional conversation, I mean, I think there is, I might be saying something contentious here, and you're welcome to tell me to get lost, but like Baroness Black was somebody who was brought in just prior to the pandemic, actually, to evaluate treatment services for addiction in the UK, and she produced a really interesting report, which confirmed a lot of things we know, that community-based services are better, etc., etc., etc.
And that it's really underfunded and has been for a while. She was quite clear.
Yeah, you know, so could you stop killing off the thing that works, was what she said. Thank you very much. But another thing she said, and I think this is really interesting, was the deprofessionalization, the dumbing down of professional interventions because of the overuse and the inappropriate use of peer support mechanisms, and the sort of valorizing of peer support as though it were a professional intervention when it's not. And particularly the whole growth of things like sober coaches and stuff like that, which, you know, become the cheap option, or maybe not so cheap option, depends which one you go for.
I've never heard of a cheap sober coach, Noel.
Wrong word. Peer support workers is what they're called. The cheap option for actually employing a qualified professional. And sober coaches is something else altogether. So forget I said that. They're overcharging for nothing.
But I hear what you mean. I mean, I think that it's I think there's the possibility of those roles, especially within primary interventions, being a way to deliver a statutory contract more cheaply, because there's less money coming from central government or the local authority to deliver your contract. That being said, we know from working, you know, in the sector that in some respects the best support can still come from a peer along with the rest of the intervention, but the peer support element of it
I'm not disparaging that. I'm more thinking about within the arts, and there's been I think a similar move in the arts in terms of the integration of community-based approaches, because that's where you get funded, for saying that whatever people do on stage is acting, and obviously it's not. Sometimes it's not. Acting is a particular set of skills that we want people to acquire. Professional actors spend some time learning them, and it is important what they bring to the table, and they're not exactly the same things. And sort of what happens to the arts within that? Does this replace the arts as well in that field? I'm guessing that there are similar types of questions going on, Matt, and that you have to think about, and similar dynamics.
So I think it's difficult, because I think well, it's not difficult. It's what's complicated is that what one person's notion of acting is really different from another person's notion of acting. So I have a really clear idea for me what acting is, and it probably aligns with what your notion of acting is, which is a very highly skilled, trained actor who, you know, can modulate between certain characters, has a range of skills and tools at, you know, at their disposal. You know, they've got a very good, you know, they're on voice, they're on, you know, their dialect is clean and clear and cut. And, you know, the thing is, though, actually that's one type of acting, and that's one type of acting which is really useful for particular kinds of performance experiences or particular things that we put on stage. There are many actors, so let's say people that are paid to do that thing, who have never trained and don't have that skill set. That, you know, that's one of the most enticing things for some people about the profession, is that seemingly you can, like, walk down the street one day, someone looks at you and goes, "You're going to be a star," and the next day you are. But, you know, there's something about that sort of special quality that people have, especially on camera. I mean, you know, there is something about
in film that's definitely more possible than it is, say, on stage. I mean, it's rare that you see somebody walk off the street and go onto a stage and then and have it. I mean, I think there are a set of skills, but in film, I mean, the ultimate, in one ways, and we're going into this conversation about the role of reality TV and how we've gone into that sort of stuff, and the role of EastEnders and etc. And sort of, I get what you're saying. I mean, we're going to come back to the valuable cross-fertilization that happens, and there is a valuable cross-fertilization that happens. But I'd like to just push the conversation maybe to a slightly ridiculous extreme. The deprofessionalization, the dumbing down, the attack on science, the flat earthing, the attack on vaccines, etc. I see them all as connected, and there was a very extreme example of that. And again, I'm pushing it here, but I mean, I think it'd be interesting to talk about it. An extreme example is that, you know, one of the most powerful planets on the earth, elected a dumbass who, with no qualifications, to lead them. And that
Well,
seemed
don't talk about the UK like that. Come on, Noel.
Yeah, right. Well,
I think you were talking about America, but
at least the dumbass we've got in power at the moment actually had a career that he could claim that qualified him. He's still a dumbass, but I am talking about America. I'm talking about a dumbass who promoted themselves as a dumbass, and that's what they said. I'm a dumbass. I'm not like them. Vote for me, and people did, and that seems to me an extreme example of this dumbassing down stuff.
Well, it was really fascinating is that I've never really thought of this before, but you've just sort of made a connection for me, because I always talk about the value of the deprofessionalized performer as that they bring to the table a level of authenticity, which you wouldn't ever get by the it's less likely to get from the highly trained performer. And of course, that's exactly what Donald Trump offered up to the world. He said,
precisely. I've also got a whole bunch of professional actors I know are now after you because they're very authentic in their performances. Yeah, it's their raison. You've just made a lot of enemies there, Matt, I'm afraid.
But there is there is something about watching. So the only reason I would sort of advocate for, not all the time, but for acknowledging that there is value in something which hasn't been professionalized is that you can get a quality of performance out of untrained actors which you just do not get from I have never seen it in a trained performer at that level, and it's a tricky one because you can't repeat it often. And so that's the great thing about a trained actor, trained performer, is that you go, I'm going to get a similar performance over and over and over again. But if you set the conditions right for the untrained performer, you can hopefully stimulate something similar enough times that you can get a repeatable performance. But it means that you have to recalibrate what it is that you're trying to do in your working methodology. And so when I hire professional directors or writers or a theater creative who, let's say, is more used to working with the sort of trained their raw material is trained at RADA or LAMDA, or it knows how to modulate in those ways we were talking about. What I say to them is, you have to go into this creative process with the people that you're going to be working with at Outside Edge or wherever else, and know that your raw material is different. So it's not like it's the same thing as a painter showing up to a canvas and for the first time not painting with oils but starting to paint with watercolors, and you're going to get a different quality of color, a different quality of texture, all of that stuff. You can still make the picture, you can still make the painting, but you have to be okay with and actually lean into what where that raw material can extend to and what it can do for you, because you'll get different colors and they will be the most vivid colors, and you'll get different textures. They'll be the most incredible textures, but they're those textures and they're unique and authentic, and they're not going to be the other ones. So don't try to make them the other ones.
Yeah, I think it's beautifully said, Matt. When we were talking, the visual arts were coming to mind for me, and I was thinking of the work of people like Picasso, for example, who would sit in this conversation, I think, very comfortably and start bemoaning the idea of training artists, that you have to do it, but you sort of have to forget it as well. So that you can do the art, you have to forget the training. I think Picasso was a highly trained, highly skilled craftsman. He really knew his craft, but he also tried to get over it and get under it and get away from it and not be caught up in his craft. And I guess he would argue that it's just ego stuff. We don't want to be proving that we're good at something. What we want to be doing is art, and that's a really important conversation, I think.
I think that when you work with a trained actor, or a trained performer, they've worked so hard to get to a point where they're in control often of the skills and the tools, and then they have to work really hard to forget. Yes. Whereas I think when you work with someone who hasn't gone through that kind of training or is doing it in a sort of non-professional capacity, the frustrating thing is that they don't go through they haven't gone through the training, so they don't have the tools and the skills, but they're sort of still at the point where they're trying to forget that they're doing it because they're always so conscious of the fact that they're doing something for the first time. Yeah. So a lot of working, I suppose, with sort of community participants or people that are not trained is trying to make them know that actually just being present and being in the space and doing what they actually know that they can do is enough, that they are enough, and that is, especially for people I think in recovery, that is the greatest lesson they can possibly take away from this. You stand on stage and you are enough. You are valuable enough and worthy enough to warrant an audience showing up to clap. That is enough.
Yeah, that's beautifully said, Matt. I think that's right. That's absolutely right, without a doubt. I was thinking when you were thinking about some of those things like the empty space and those exercises that you do about, well, just go and sit in the chair. What do you mean, just go and sit in the chair? Just go and sit in the chair. But you don't mean to, you don't need to sort of catapult in. You don't need to make a song and dance about it. Go and sit in the chair, please. Just be in the chair. A lot of acting training is literally like that. People don't get it. That is, if you go and study Meyerhoff, is it, or whoever it is, Meyerhold, whatever, I can't remember the names of them anymore. That they spend so much time just stripping away from people being defensive in that type of space. And I think you're right. When you can teach somebody to just be good enough in a space, being witnessed by other people, and that's the key thing. It's not just looking in a mirror, but being witnessed by other people. There's a profound sense of achievement in that. And extraordinary.
And I think it's it's getting that little devil on your shoulder away. So I think that is something that hopefully through training, but also through doing it over and over and over again, the professional artist, performer slowly minimizes the sound of negativity, that wasn't very good, you fucked that up, but like that constant barrage that you sort of get from yourself. Whereas if you're doing it as a hobby and you only do this every couple every couple months or couple years, that's really quite present. And so again, for people that are coming into recovery and they're using drama or creativity to support themselves and support that work that they're doing on themselves, a lot of, I think, the lessons that they can learn from doing this kind of activity is to acknowledge that voice is there, but not to let it overwhelm and take over. And it's a really safe way to
form
do that.
A relationship to it. It's there. Let's decide what I do with it. I either listen to it or I don't, or I go and choose to make another voice.
Turn the volume down, exactly.
I'm with you. And the more we can be mindful about things, I think there's also something really, there's something inherently healing about the arts, full stop. And I'm sort of playing slight devil's advocate with you a bit in the conversation, because it's where my heart is. And some of the most extraordinary theatre I've ever seen has been done by people that will never be on stage again. We're on stage for the first time, and just were open about who they were and their experience. And I've seen audiences stunned into silence by it, and not understanding what's happening, except they're having the tops of their heads blown off by something that they will never see again. And it's extraordinary stuff. I guess the difference between that and the professional is that the professional tries to be able to repeat that experience. It's not accidental. It's not momentary, but they try and capture it. Not too success for all of them, but for some, yes. So and again, there are some people I know very well who work in the film industry that are going to sort of hit me hard when I next see them. But I think it's more possible in the film sector for people to come in as non-professionals who, not in the good sense, but in the really, really unhelpful sense of they have no talent whatsoever.
It's a very different, but a really highly. I think that film actors or tele actors as well. Acting for camera is an incredibly skillful, skillful thing to do. To do it well, it's
if they're acting, that's very kind of you. If they're acting, yes, it is. Sort of, but you and I both know that you can set a camera up and film a dummy and get a good shot if you technically know what you're doing.
Well, more frighteningly though, I think you can set a camera up and put it on a really good actor, and you might not get a very good performance. So I have a friend who became she's now a really, really successful agent, but she moved from she moved from working sort of, in theater behind the scenes to agenting about a little over a decade ago. And we were sort of talking about this difference between, working with theater actors in one capacity and then also trying to move their careers forward on film and TV. And she said, the most fascinating thing is that I know these amazing stage actors, and I was told by a senior agent, never sign them until you put them on camera. I mean, unless you're comfortable and confident with them only doing theater work, because you have no idea actually how it's going to how they will translate. And she said she said it was the most fascinating lesson to learn, because she would see these people that were beautiful in real life and really charismatic on stage, and then the camera just didn't pick up certain things that you would get in person. And and then with other people, it would be the exact opposite. And so it's about facial structure and skin tone and quality and all these things that we're not really in control of, and that I don't know that you can learn, which is unfortunate.
I'm only being disparaging about film because I was shit at it.
Well, maybe you weren't shit at it, Noel. Maybe it was just that.
That's right. I'm your next participant, Matt. I need you in my life. I'm in there.
But I guess,
well done. It's automatic after a while, isn't it? Something negative about them. I'm going to be their good voice.
No, but I hear what you're saying. I do. I think that camera. It can capture something much smaller that doesn't, you don't have to be quite as aware of how that will.
There's nothing subtle about me. There's absolutely nothing about me. And so like the camera gets on and it goes, oh my God, get rid of him. And that's fair enough. I totally accept that about myself in the line. But this sort of segues us into the next bit of the conversation, if you don't mind, which is because, theatre is live. I mean, it's live action. It's people in real life together. All the theories of theatre tell you that. The big difference between theatre and any other art form is it's live. It's a relationship between a performer and a witness, and that's it. And that's what theatre is different to, say, camera work. You can do film work without necessarily a relationship to your audience who are witnessing it. Well, you won't have a relationship to them because you'll never know them. You can't be in all those cinemas where the film is shown. So film in that sense as an art form, the dynamics are more similar to visual arts, although there is the willing suspension of disbelief, which then brings it back to theatre and the core of theatre. But theatre itself is a in real life experience between two or more bodies. And then the pandemic came along. And it was like, I'm not allowed to be in a room with, what do I do with a theatre company in a situation like that? I remember when we first saw you, or last time we saw you, it was about 2 weeks into the lockdown or something. I seem to remember thinking, this is unfair asking Matt to come on now, because it's like he's in the middle of the most shocking experience of his professional life ever. I'm running a theatre company and I can't meet anyone. So how in God's name did you get through all that stuff, Matt?
Well, I mean, at the time it was even a little bit funny, because there was a sort of absurdity about it, right? Because you kind of go like, this is stupid, like this is crazy. Like, why are we even trying anymore? Like, let's just sort of sit back for the next couple of weeks, because it's not going to take that long for this little virus.
I remember the denial.
Why don't we just kick back and
That's right. It'll be over by Christmas. Don't you worry. 1918, 1919, 1920.
Yeah. This can't be very long, right? It was absurd because not only is it a theater company, but also the participatory art side. What we had been like quite loudly, aggressively banging on about for a long time was that we reduce social isolation and loneliness. And suddenly you had an entire population that was reveling, well, not reveling, but that were being forced into social isolation.
Legally obliged to social isolate, I seem to remember.
Quite. Yeah. And so we weren't really sure, and I definitely wasn't sure how this was all going to, what we were supposed to do. I mean, it was very clear very quickly, because the people that we work with in the participatory arts space are incredibly vulnerable. So we're not just working with people who have addiction issues or are in active addiction. We're working with people with, multiple complex needs. So people that are, vulnerably housed, people that have criminal justice system contact, people who have severe mental health issues or physical disabilities. We have like 60-something% earned less than £12,000 last year. So we're talking about like, some of the poorest people in one of the wealthiest cities on earth, London. And so we knew that everything had to pivot towards making sure that they were safe, and I do mean like safe, and that they had everything that they needed. So our pastoral care and wraparound support work went into overdrive. So in many respects, we kind of knew that was going to take up a lot of space, for like headspace and energy for us. But at the same time, the thing that holds our connection with them together and their sense of community, so that thing that was reducing their social isolation together, was a shared passion and love for drama, for theater, for creativity. And so we met as many of them as we could in group Zoom calls or whatever we were using at the time, and phone calls. We were doing sort of like group telephone calls because we knew that we could do that quite easily, but actually with many of them we couldn't because they didn't have credits. And so there was a lot of sort of trying to figure out the means by which people could communicate with us and the means by which they wanted to continue to be with each other. But then also we had a serious question to them, which was, do you have any desire whatsoever to do drama and theater right now? Like, do you want us to do the writing group next week? Like, and we could do it on a phone call. Do you want us to try to do a drama group on the phone? And they, it was a resounding yes, because they absolutely needed something to distract them. They needed something to reconnect with each other. They needed to be creative. They needed to, to get all those good chemical reactions that happen in your body when you're with people and when you're doing something creative, and the thing that was driving them to come to us week after week. So we only took 2 weeks off, if that, maybe 10 days before we started running Zoom sessions or whatever the platform was that we used for the first few months. And we started everything back up within, there was one group that we'd yet to start. Our women's group was meant to start the week the pandemic happened. So we delayed its start for another couple of weeks, and we delayed our intermediate acting group by a couple months. But our drop-in group, so we had our drop-in writers group, our drop-in drama group, eventually our women's group. It's weird because we only, at the start of this, we only ran 4 groups or something, and now we're running 12 or 13 every week. So I'm sort of, it's weird for me to sort of think back and go, what were those like few groups that we started? Oh, and then we started, all of the service users, the people that are coming to the participatory arts activities wanted to meet each other for peer support. And so what they proposed, and we then facilitated, was that they would have an hour or 2 hours of a sort of open Zoom time on a Friday afternoon, and we would have a peer-led check-in every week. And so that was something that we started in lockdown that we continued, which was totally volunteer-led. And it was phenomenal. It went on to win the Mayor of London's 2020 Volunteering Award for delivering differently. So our volunteers, for adapting and innovating in the pandemic, won the Mayor of London's Volunteering Award because of this. It's phenomenal stuff.
Brilliant. And so you got over that period, and then you moved services online. I guess you got through the first series of lockdowns. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3. And then we got to a point where the rules changed a little bit. We began to be able to come back into real life. Yeah,
so because we deliver peer support activity, our drama activities are peer support activities for people with mental health and addiction issues. And so when the government guidelines changed and said that you could bring up to 15 people together for a peer support group, which is like an AA or an NA meeting is how they kind of described it. We said, well, that's what we do. And we got sign off from our board of trustees and our public health commissioners to do this. And we found some big spaces, and we put big squares that were 2 meters wide on, down, and we got everyone in masks. And so we limited the number of people that could come into the space, but we started running hybrid online in-person activities. So in these big spaces, we set up webcams, these wide LED webcams, and these big screen TVs or projection screens, so that they could all interact with each other. And we, I think really, frankly, innovated or it felt like at the time, and continues to feel like, we sort of innovated a hybrid way of delivering participatory arts activities that frankly not many other arts organizations or social welfare or health and well-being charities, as far as I know, were delivering. And because we saw an increase in need, because we were suddenly much more accessible by being online. So we saw something like a 125% increase in attendance last year. We then started to offer more activities. So we offered additional drop-in drama activities. We offered, the women's group finally got going. We fundraised to run a moving recovery group. So we partnered with this incredible dance company out of Chester called Fallen Angels Dance Theater, who are recovery-led, and their choreographer, artistic directors in recovery, and he uses the terminology of recovery to teach dance. And so we had this group that was sort of avoiding physical ill health by getting themselves moving through dance. It was an incredible year in some respects. And then eventually we sort of pushed it we pushed it to its sort of to the nth degree, I suppose, because we ended up making a piece of theater that was totally hybrid. So we rehearsed it with half the cast on Zoom, the other half in person, interacting with each other, and then took it into a theater and did the same thing. So so we performed it with half the cast on Zoom, the audience watching on Zoom, and then the other half of performers in a theater space together. So totally bonkers if you really think about it, because a year before that, or less than a year before that, we had no idea how we would do any of the work that we do digitally, let alone reach people that didn't live inside the M25. Like it was we had been trying to partner with Fallen Angels Dance Theater for years and just couldn't make the budget work because we couldn't ship them, we couldn't ship them down, or we couldn't go up there. Well, suddenly we did it like that.
and there was something like that was going on for a lot of people. And think about some of the traditional recovery groups, the AAs and all that sort of stuff. They sort of went online overnight, and although people were very frightened and stuff like that, they worked. And one of the things that happened, which was really interesting, which is I think what you're describing, is that connections grew in some ways. Although we lost a lot from the in real, but connections in terms of people started popping up in meetings from America and Australia and around Europe and stuff like that, and suddenly people were sort of finding themselves getting to know people all over the world. And I think, didn't something sort of similar happen in terms of the services that you started to offer? And
yeah, we had a great shout out from Lee from Manchester on the BBC a couple months ago when he was being interviewed about his recovery journey. He said and I go to Outside Edge every week, and so we were kind of shocked by it, because we're used to, maybe if we're lucky, getting some local press coverage in London, but suddenly to have BBC London sort of having references for us. I mean, we've had people from all around the world that have come into the activities. They've been zooming in from Africa, from Europe, from North America, with some regularity, actually. So we now, we were doing our annual report this week, and I don't think I've ever had, maybe 1%, if that, of our participants would come from outside of London. It's now, or last year it was 15%.
Wow.
And I mean, they mostly are still from the UK because of the time difference, but because we're the only ones that are doing what we do at the level that we're doing it at, or at the volume that we're doing it at, and maybe as publicly as we're doing it at, we're attracting a lot of people into it, and it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And what's really sort of fabulous about it, though, is that on a hyper local level, we're seeing that sense of recovery community has been strengthened through the consistency of the offer and the type of offer that that we've been providing across the last 19 months. So our sort of West London cohort of people who didn't, who sort of knew each other before the pandemic and then got to know each other much better during lockdown. Now they're, they show up every week to take the tube together to come to some of our East London activities. So there's this little cohort that kind of travel together and they hang out and do things. And like that is an active recovery community that has been brought together and founded through, a shared love of arts and culture. It's phenomenal.
It's interesting because there's a couple of things I'm going to come and ask you a question in a minute and ask you to think about it. But it's interesting what you're describing is there's a lot of people who sort of about social media, for example, have said stuff about how social media, rots your brain, it's a bad thing, and there are elements of it that it will rot your brain. But I'm sure Plato said that reading will rot your brain. Fairly sure he argued that this newfangled reading and writing stuff was going to rot your brain. It was either him or Aristotle that said it'll destroy your memory, rot your brain. Oh well, they were wrong, but one of the big things about social media, people said, was it would mean disconnection from social connection, and actually the opposite was true, that people found more social connection and started meeting each other and meeting people that they would never have met before. Not for everybody, I mean, obviously, but there did seem to be that thing, and that you're describing a similar sort of process, that this online world. Now, one of my strong feelings is this, that the shift to an online consciousness is something that was inevitably going to happen, and maybe would happen in a longer time period. And the lockdown has shifted that consciousness shift, or that move in the way we understand ourselves as humans, much quicker because of the lockdown, and that's happening. And many theorists currently are arguing that online experience is having the same impact on human consciousness that universal literacy did via the invention of the printing press, and that the printing press and the written word and reading and writing actually literally changed human consciousness hugely. So 16th, 17th centuries, a massive shift in the way human beings understand themselves. And the argument is that sort of the online world is something similar, and that the lockdown may have pushed this process further a bit. So we still have to wait and see, but I mean, I think the swings and roundabouts. One question I have of you, though, I'm really interested in this, is if I said to you in January 2019, oh, Matt, by the way, the whole world is going to change. You're going to get locked up at home. You'll have all this shit happen, deadly virus. Everything's going to fall apart, but you'll be okay. You'll manage it, mate. Don't you worry about it. What would you have thought at that point if I'd said that to you?
That you're crazy. That I couldn't. It would be impossible. And also, that'll never happen.
Never happened, because our
scientists... Stop talking. Stop doing your sci-fi.
It was Valence, wasn't he? He said, it's just the flu, don't worry. Yeah. We'll all catch it and it'll be fine. It'll be endemic in no time at all. That didn't last very long, Patrick. Well done.
No.
There you go. But I guess, yes, that's right. You'd have approached that and said, there's no possibility that I can adapt and cope to that. But the way you just described what you did is extraordinary description of adaptation, more than coping, actually thriving with it. I mean, not that we would welcome, I'm not going to welcome another pandemic. No, thanks, I've had enough, that's it. But you did thrive in it. You've grown from it. You developed new ways of doing things, which is extraordinary. I mean, how on earth does that happen, do you think? That you managed to do that rather than, jump in a river and say, I'm giving up? Well,
I think there's a couple of things. I mean, I think in terms of the speed at which the adapting was happening and the changing was happening was in part because there was this sort of perfect storm, I suppose, for all these ideas that people had that we could potentially be doing things more online and, whatnot. But then you suddenly had to do it. And we kind of had all the technology. We kind of had the technology. No one heard of Zoom by, on March 1st, 2020. So, but by the end of March, we all knew what it was. Yeah. But there was this, we sort of had it at our many of us had it at our fingertips, and so it wasn't because there you didn't have to apologize for doing it, and it could be really rough, and you knew it wasn't going to be perfect. So there's that sort of we knew that we weren't going to have to do it perfectly, so we could experiment and risk something and fail miserably, but it would be okay because we knew that everyone would forgive us. So I think that sort of part of us, sort of like what I was describing with our service users, where a lot of doing the drama with Outside Edge is about teaching them to forgive themselves and to be okay with failure. But I think there was sort of a sense, as we were adapting and changing, that unlike in any other situation we'd ever been in, that it was probably going to be okay to not get it right the first 10 or 15 times we did it. Yeah. And so we all sort of embraced change and embraced innovation quite quickly. I think in terms of resilience and not being flattened by what felt like an endless barrage of curveballs, which we sort of collectively felt, and which I do think was is a collective trauma that we're all still in the midst of and working through.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt. Absolutely.
Like, but I think it's great that, like, in some respects, we now are just, we're at a point where we can just say that and no one kind of goes, oh, those are uncomfortable words. I think what we've all collectively gone through has allowed us to sort of face that kind of terminology, or face that kind of big psychological dissection and go, yeah, actually, you know what, it's okay that we can sort of talk through mental health things and talk through, traumatic experiences like that, as we would, it was a really rainy day yesterday. Yeah. And I'm not to minimize it, but to start to bring it up to that same kind of level, that we kind of go, well, this is the condition in which we find ourselves now, and it's okay to sort of just name it and call it out. Yeah. And that doesn't make you weak for saying that, or that doesn't sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's also, I'm sort of, I think you're being a bit modest as well. I think the way you and your services adapted are testament to what it is you do. So it's thinking about what you do. You offer sort of creativity and high grade creativity. There's a bar, and you have a negotiation and conversation about that bar where it is, but it's about sort of asking people to sort of not just turn up and throw the guts on the floor and say that's art. There's something else is going on. So you're asking people to contribute and commit and engage, join in a community, be part of a collective experience, and all those things we know are evidenced to help people who are having a really tough time. People can
we sort of, okay. As a North American, I take what you're saying on board, and I will agree that there is a certain amount of modesty in how I'm approaching this, because actually what we did at Outside Edge, and I say that as the CEO, but also as someone who led an incredible team and was supported by an incredible group of trustees and funders through this, was that we actually, in many respects, flourished and found a sense of self-worth and found a place for ourselves, which I think we always wanted to have, but didn't quite feel we were able to take hold of. And we smashed it. I don't know how else to say it. I think that me and my staff and our trustees, we took on the challenge and we absolutely smashed it out of the ballpark. And our service users did as well. I mean, the fact is, it was a collective effort where everyone stepped up to the plate and took the biggest challenge they possibly could individually and made something of it, which is why they won the Mayor of London's volunteering award. And why we've, as a small charity, actually won a whole bunch of sector awards this year in recognition of the work that we were doing with service users, and also, our work for health and well-being, in the sector.
One of the ways I think about it is like this, that there have been a whole bunch of people who are on the outside edge of society, hence the name of your theatre company, that have had certain types of experiences that maybe people not on the outside edge don't really understand, but can be compassionate about, and sort of understand and say, there but for the grace of something go I. I think there is I have a genuine sense in which that attitude has changed, and there's more of a sense of there I am. I get it now.
Yeah, I think that one. So I can sort of speak as a leader of an organization that was leading a team and leading something through a very challenging period. That what I came to realize, sort of about 6 months into it, there was that brief moment before things went really terrible again, really like tits up again, where we could slightly reflect on what we had gone through. And what became very clear was that moment when lockdown happened and we pivoted very, very sharply towards the needs of the people we were there to support, and went, are you safe? Are you, we went through the checklist with them, and we surrounded, as a community, we surrounded the most vulnerable members of it and said, how can we get you devices? How can we make sure you're being fed? How can we do all that stuff that will make, that is like basic human need? It was also the most values-driven moment, I think, that we as an organization and me as a leader has ever been. But that didn't go away. So all the decisions that came out of that, which were very much a process of collective decision making, which we had never actually engaged with that deeply before, because we suddenly could, by convening large groups of people on Zoom and saying, what should we do for you? What do you need? Meant that we became a much more values-led organization, and much more beneficiary-led organization than we'd ever had been before, which meant that actually there was absolute clarity throughout that as to the direction with which we were, where we were going. There was no, it was unwavering in many respects. It was just a matter of whether we were going to get enough funding to do it all.
Yes, exactly.
But we knew exactly where we were going.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think that values conversation. I'm not going to get party political about this. I sort of that's another conversation. I don't want to get into it, but there was a real. I remember talking to a young guy I've known since he was born. To be honest, he's in his 20s now. And it was in the middle of one of the lockdowns. We were sort of out on one of our sort of allowed strolls or whatever it is they were called. We may have even been breaking the law. There you go, come and arrest me. And he said to me, he said, it's really interesting. It's the first time we've been part of a national effort. And I said, what? So yeah, it's the first time in my life that I know now what it's like to be part of a national effort, that we're all in this together and we're working on something together. And I feel really part of, trying to find a way through this. And it was a really touching conversation. It wasn't naive at all. It was like he really nailed it. And I'm like fascinated by things like we've got a Tory chancellor talking Keynesian economics. Sort of, what?
Yeah.
Like, and the values have turned upside down in that sense. I mean, it's sort of, we all know that austerity doesn't work. We all know that if you have state investment, that those jobs might disappear after 20 years, but the 20 years that they're there, they're really helpful for people, and they stop all sorts of social disintegration, etc., etc. So build the dams, god damn it, build the roads, god damn it, etc., etc. That stimulus will work. We know it, and here we are talking in those terms, and we know that that's real, and that's about values, isn't it? The values of being connected as human beings, that we are one.
Yeah. It's out of the topsy-turviness of it all, and the sort of cloudiness of the whole thing. I mean, I think that became quite clear for many people. Or I suppose you sort of see the flip of that now, which is that people's reaction to those that are either not vaccinated or not wearing masks in public spaces. It's then about, well, you're breaking that value, you're breaking that connection, and though rationally we might know that actually it's not necessarily going to increase the risk to me, or we're not going to see the death rates necessarily peak. There is something about that kind of the purity, I suppose, of that experience for so many people, where they went, well, I'm not going to meet up with my friends. I'm not going to meet up with my family. I'm not going to break the rules. Yeah. I mean, one of my friends kept saying that every time there was this sort of urge to like transgress in the early days, her and one of her friends would just look at each other and go, well, what would Captain Tom do? What would Captain Tom do? And it would sort of stop them in their tracks, and they would go, no, we're not going to break the lockdown rules today.
Well, I stand up and salute that guy. He was amazing, Captain. Fantastic.
I think that, but then that sort of, I think it's that kind of, it was the clarity with which the moral compass was sort of directed, and then you would have, at the time of the first lockdown, I had sort of lived around the corner from where Dominic Cummings' house in London was, and like, remember when he broke the rules, or then when we all found out they broke the rules, and like, we all just had to go, we just walked by his house just to sort of watch all the press descend on him, and we just thought, shame on you, shame on you.
Absolutely. And then people wanting to listen to him as though he had something to say about other people. It's like, no, I'm sorry. But it's what's interesting to me, and this is sort of interesting to psychologists, that in all this social isolation, what we did was behave like a herd looking after each other. It's extraordinary. And what we didn't do is behave like a bunch of mindless zombies trying to eat each other just to survive.
Yeah,
it's the opposite of this dystopian fear we have.
Yeah, which gives us hope for humanity. I hope, Noel.
we're getting towards the end, and I want to make sure people understand A, how to contact you, B, how to support you, particularly financially, because a lot of charities struggle. I'm not suggesting you are. I'm sure you're wonderfully financed, like unlike any other charity on the planet.
No, it's called charity for a reason.
That's right. I'd like to know how people can give you some money. So give them the dosh in good, what's it, the Irish sort of singers did Live Aid. What was his name?
Bono.
No, the Irish singer who set up Bono was his mate. Anyway, it will come to me. And how people can find out more about you, how they can support you, and what are your upcoming projects. So in no particular order, tell us about your upcoming projects first, and then we'll go through how they can find out more about you and how they can support you.
Sure. So I guess to find out what we're up to every month, people can check out our social media accounts, but also through the website, which is probably the most concise bit of information, and that's at www.edgetc, like Edge theatrecompany.org. So www.edgetc.org, and there's a list of all of the activities that we're running for free across London. And I guess because we're doing hybrid work, you can come from anywhere around the world at the moment and zoom in. And there's contact details on there for how to access those. So you have a very, very brief induction form that you need to fill in, and then you can come and join any of those activities. And it's a range right now. So again, there's 3 drop-in groups in East, West, and South London, where they play fun improvisation games every week for 2 hours. There's 2 writers groups. There is a women's only group, so a women's drama group. There is a group called Moving Recovery, which is the dance group that I was talking about. There's a peer-led check-in every week. There is an intermediate acting group. There is an intermediate script writing group, which we're working with the Royal Court to deliver. And then there's an advanced acting group who are getting ready to make a performance, which we will announce very shortly, along with another professional performance that we're about to announce. So in February and March of next year, God willing, fingers crossed, knock on wood, the rest of it, we will have 2 productions in London that we will be able to share with audiences, and we'll announce that on social media when we're allowed to from the co-producers, presenters. But we're really, really excited about it. One of the pieces was developed through our script competition, which we're also running next year again. But we did a script competition in lockdown to get scripts from writers about issues related to addiction. We had this.
I remember that when that came out. So you've completed that project. That's amazing.
So we completed it. We did R&D on 3 of the scripts, and we're progressing 3 of them. We hope to production, but one of them is very producible right now, and so we've decided that we're going to. It was a much more finished draft, so we're going to produce that in the new year very early, and then we're announcing the next iteration of the script competition imminently, actually, and so hopefully we'll open for submissions in March to June sometime, and run this all again, which is incredibly exciting. It's a phenomenal project. And if you want to support any of these activities, there's a donation tab on the website, www.edgetc.org. That's www.edgetc.org, because all of our activities are free for the people that access them. So the only way that we can make this happen is through the generous donations of hopefully some of your listeners or our wonderful public health commissioners and trusts and foundations. So
just for people who are listening don't understand, I mean, this is almost a direct quote from somebody in the one of the large funding bodies, which is saying that would normally shell out money, saying we're running out of money because during lockdown, a lot of people went to the wall. A lot of the activities that charities needed used as core funding, things like shops, those secondhand clothes shops that loads of charities have, just didn't make any money during the lockdown. Of course, a lot of fundraising activities, the cake mornings, everything stopped. So suddenly every charity is looking for more money because their attempts to raise cash were knocked on the head during the pandemic. So it's tough. And
for us, what's really difficult is that our expenditure went through the roof
yeah.
during the pandemic and has continued to go through the roof because the need went up. And so we met the need, which was expensive. And now we need to continue to meet the need because we have started to meet it, and we can't. It's not safe. There's a safeguarding issue.
I get it.
If we revoke it,
I'm a trustee of another charity that works in the addiction sector. Exactly the same story. You know, trebled, quadrupled the numbers of people turning up easily, and that's just the fact, people. So you need to get your cards out of your pocket, and you need to go on his website, and you need to give him money. It's that simple.
Thank you.
Because it's really, really important stuff. Matt, it's been such a joy to have you on. And people will laugh about this, but Matt was doing his usual anxiety before the show, going, we'll have nothing to talk about. I'll run out of things to say after 30 seconds. I'm like, Matt, I don't think we will, but just trust me on that one. Why don't you? Anyway, I could barely get him to shut up, is the truth. I mean, that was my first experience of him, and it's going to be my experience with him for the rest of my life, I think. But there you go. I don't want you to shut up, in fact, because you have such fascinating things to share with the world, and really do. Glad to see that Outside Edge has continued through this stuff, and I have no doubt you're going to go from strength to strength. We do have to finish there, folks. It's been lovely to have you. Stay with us, Matt. It's been lovely to have you here. Everybody, love to see you next week on next week's show. Whether we've got somebody else on, but I don't know who it is. It'll be somebody amazing, and it'd be lovely to see you all then. But for now, bye bye.